Chatsworth House is a stately home in Derbyshire, England. It is in the Derbyshire Dales, about 3.5 miles northeast of Bakewell and 9 miles west of Chesterfield. It is the seat of the Duke of Devonshire and has been home to the Cavendish family since 1549. Standing on the east bank of the River Derwent, Chatsworth looks across to the low hills that divide the Derwent and Wye valleys. The house, set in expansive parkland and backed by wooded, rocky hills rising to heather moorland, contains a unique collection of priceless paintings, furniture, old master drawings, neoclassical sculptures, books and other artifacts. Chatsworth has been selected as the United Kingdom's favourite country house several times. History: 11th–16th century. The name Chatsworth is a corruption of Chettlesworth, meaning the court of Chettle. In the reign of Edward the Confessor, a man of Norse origin named Chettle held lands jointly with a Saxon named Lietnoth in 3 townships: Ensor to the west of the Derwent, and Langley and Chesterfield to the east. Chettle was deposed after the Norman conquest, and in the Domesday Book, the manor of Chesterfield is listed as the property of the Crown in the custody of William de Peverell. Chatsworth ceased to be a large estate until the 15th century, when it was acquired by the Lecce family, who owned property nearby. They enclosed the first park at Chatsworth and built a house on the high ground in what is now the southeastern part of the garden. In 1549 they sold all the property in the area to Sir William Cavendish, treasurer of the King's Chamber and the husband of Bessie of Hardwicke, who had persuaded him to sell his property in Suffolk and settle in her native county. Bess began to build the new house in 1553. She selected a site near the river, which was drained by digging a series of reservoirs, which doubled as fish ponds. Sir William died in 1557, but Bess finished the house in the 1560s and lived there with her 4th husband, George Talbot, 6th Earl of Shrewsbury. In 1568 Shrewsbury was entrusted with the custody of Mary, Queen of Scots, and brought his prisoner to Chatsworth several times from 1570 onwards. She lodged in the apartment now known as the Queen of Scots Rooms, on the top floor above the Great Hall, which faces onto the inner courtyard. An accomplished needlewoman, Bess joined Mary, Queen of Scots, at Chatsworth for extended periods in 1569, 1570, and 1571, during which time they worked together on the Oxburgh hangings. Bess died in 1608 and Chatsworth was passed to her eldest son, Henry. The estate was purchased from Henry by his brother William Cavendish, 1st Earl of Devonshire, for £10,000. 17th century. Few changes were made at Chatsworth until the mid-17th century. William Cavendish, 3rd Earl of Devonshire, was a staunch royalist and was expelled from the House of Lords in 1642. He left England for the safety of the continent and his estates were sequestrated. Chatsworth was occupied by both sides during the Civil War, and the 3rd Earl did not return to the house until the restoration of the monarchy. He reconstructed the principal rooms in an attempt to make them more comfortable, but the Elizabethan house was outdated and unsafe. The 4th Earl of Devonshire, who was to become the 1st Duke in 1694 for helping to put William of Orange on the English throne, was an advanced Whig and was forced to retire to Chatsworth during the reign of King James II. This called for a rebuilding of the house, which began in 1687. Cavendish initially planned to reconstruct only the south wing with the state apartments, so he decided to retain the Elizabethan courtyard plan, despite the fact that this layout was becoming increasingly unfashionable. He enjoyed building and reconstructed the east front, that included the painted hall and long gallery, followed by the rebuilding of the west front from 1699 to 1702. The north front was completed in 1707, just before the Duke died. The first Duke also had large parterre gardens designed by George London and Henry Wise, who was later appointed by Queen Anne to the post of Royal Gardener at Kensington Palace. 18th century William Cavendish, 2nd Duke of Devonshire, and William Cavendish, 3rd Duke of Devonshire, made no changes to the house and gardens, but they did contribute greatly to the collection found at Chatsworth to this date. Connoisseur of the arts, the collection include paintings, old master drawings and prints, ancient coins and carved Greek and Roman sculptures. Palladian furniture designed by William Kent was commissioned by the 3rd Duke when he had Devonshire House in London rebuilt following a fire in 1733. Upon the sale and demolition of Devonshire House in 1924, the furniture was transferred to Chatsworth. The 4th Duke made great changes to the house and gardens. He decided the approach to the house should be from the west and had the old stables and offices as well as parts of Enza village pulled down so they were not visible from the house. He also replaced the 1st Duke's formal gardens with a more natural look, designed by Lancelot Capability Brown, which he helped bring into fashion. In 1748, the 4th Duke married Lady Charlotte Boyle, the sole surviving heiress of Richard Boyle, 3rd Earl of Burlington. Lord Burlington was an accomplished architect in his own right, with many works to his name including Chiswick House. With his death, his important collection of architectural drawings and Inigo Jones mask designs, old master paintings and William Kent designed furniture were transferred to the Dukes of Devonshire. This inheritance also brought many estates to the family. 19th century. The 6th Duke was a passionate traveller, builder, gardener and collector who transformed Chatsworth. In 1811 he inherited the title and 8 major estates: Chatsworth and Hardwicke Hall in Derbyshire, Devonshire House, Burlington House and Chiswick House in London, Bolton Abbey and Lounsborough Hall in Yorkshire, and Lismore Castle in Ireland. These estates covered 200,000 acres of land in England and Ireland. The Duke was a great collector, especially of sculpture and books. When he built the north wing, he had a purpose-built sculpture gallery to house his collection and repurposed numerous rooms in the house to contain the entire libraries he would purchase at auction. The 6th Duke loved to entertain, and the early 19th century saw a rise in popularity of the English country house party, and so in 1830 the Duke converted rooms on the east side of the house into guest bedrooms. People invited to stay at Chatsworth spent the days hunting, riding, reading and playing billiards. In the evening formal dinners would take place, followed by music, charades and smoking for the men. Women would return to the bedroom many times during the day to change their outfits. These guest bedrooms at Chatsworth are the most complete set of bedrooms from the period to survive with their original furnishings. There is much Eastern influence in the decoration, including hand-painted Chinese wallpapers and fabrics which are typical of Regency taste, which developed during the reign of George IV. People who have stayed at Chatsworth include Queen Victoria and Charles Dickens. In October 1832, Princess Victoria and her mother, the Duchesses of Kent, visited Chatsworth, where she had her first formal adult dinner. At the age of 13, in the new dining room, the 6th Duke had another opportunity to welcome Victoria in 1843 when the Queen and Prince Albert returned to be entertained by a large array of illuminated fountains. The Duke spent 47 years transforming the house and gardens. A Latin inscription over the fireplace in the painted hall translates as, "William Spencer, Duke of Devonshire, inherited this most beautiful house from his father in the year 1811, which had been begun in the year of English liberty 1688, and completed it in the year of his bereavement 1840. 1688 was the year of the the Glorious Revolution, supported by the Whig dynasties including the Cavendishes. The year 1840 saw the death of the Duke's beloved niece Blanche, who was married to his heir, the future 7th Duke. In 1844 he published a book called Handbook to Chatsworth and Hardwicke. 20th century. In the early 20th century, social change and taxes began to affect the Devonshires' lifestyle. When the 8th Duke died in 1908, over £500,000 of death duties became due. This was a small charge compared to what followed 42 years later, but the estate was already burdened with debt from the 6th Duke's extravagances. The failure of the 7th Duke's business ventures at Barrow-in-Furness, and a depression in British agriculture that had been apparent since the 1870s. In 1912 the family sold 25 books printed by William Caxton and a collection of 1,347 volumes of plays acquired by the 6th Duke, including 4 Shakespeare folios and 39 Shakespeare quartos, to the Huntington Library in California. Tens of thousands of acres of land in Somerset, Sussex and Derbyshire were also sold during, and immediately after, World War I. In December 1904, King Charles I of Portugal and Queen Maria Amelia stayed at Chatsworth House during the visit to Great Britain. It snowed almost constantly while they were there, and the king reportedly started a snowball fight when he met the Marquis of Sovereign, the Portuguese envoy extraordinary and minister plenipotentiary to the court of St. James's. In 1920 the family's London mansion, Devonshire House, which occupied a 3-acre site on Piccadilly, was sold to developers and demolished. Much of the contents of Devonshire House was moved to Chatsworth, and a much smaller house at 2 Carlton Gardens near the Mall was acquired. The great conservatory in the garden at Chatsworth was demolished as it needed 10 men to run it, huge quantities of coal to heat it, and all the plants had died during the war when no coal had been available for non-essential purposes. To further reduce running costs, there was also talk of pulling down the 6th Duke's north wing, which was then regarded as having no aesthetic or historical value, but nothing came of it. Chiswick House, the celebrated Palladian villa in the suburbs of West London that the Devonshires inherited when the 4th Duke married Lord Burlington's daughter, was sold to Brentford Council in 1929. Nonetheless, life at Chatsworth continued much as before. The household was run by a controller and domestic staff were still available, although more so in the country than in the cities. The staff at Chatsworth at this time consisted of a butler, under-butler, groom of the chambers, valet, 3 footmen, a housekeeper, the Duchess's maid, 11 housemaids, 2 sewing women, a cook, 2 kitchen maids, a vegetable maid, 2 or 3 scullery maids, 2 stillroom maids, a dairy maid, 6 laundry maids and the Duchess' secretary. All of these 38 to 39 people lived in the house. Daily staff included the odd man, upholsterer, scullery maid, 2 scrubbing women, laundry porter, steam boiler man, coalman, 2 porters, lodge attendants, 2 night firemen, night porter, 2 window cleaners, and a team of joiners, plumbers and electricians. The clerk of works supervised the maintenance of the house and other properties on the estate. There were also grooms, chauffeurs and gamekeepers. The number of garden staff was somewhere between the 80 of the 6th Duke's time and the 20 or so of the early 21st century. There was also a librarian, Francis Thompson, who wrote the first book-length account of Chatsworth since the 6th Duke's Handbook. Most of the UK's country houses were put to institutional use during World War II. Some of those used as barracks were badly damaged, but the 10th Duke, anticipating that schoolgirls would make better tenants than soldiers, arranged for Chatsworth to be occupied by Penrhos College, a girls' public school in Colwyn Bay, Wales. The contents of the house were packed away in 11 days, and, in September 1939, 300 girls and the teachers moved in for a 6-year stay. The whole of the house was used, including the staterooms, which were turned into dormitories. Condensation from the breath of the sleeping girls caused fungus to grow behind some of the pictures. The house was not very comfortable for so many people, with a shortage of hot water, but there were compensations, such as skating on the canal pond. The girls grew vegetables in the garden as a contribution to the war effort. In 1944, Kathleen Kennedy, sister of John F. Kennedy, married William Cavendish, Marquess of Hartington, the elder son of the 10th Duke of Devonshire. However, he was killed in action in Belgium later in 1944, and Kathleen died in a plane crash in 1948. His younger brother Andrew became the 11th Duke in 1950. He was married to Deborah Mitford, one of the Mitford girls, and sister to Nancy Mitford, Diana Mitford, Pamela Mitford, Unity Mitford and Jessica Mitford. The modern history of Chatsworth begins in 1950. The family had not yet moved back after the war, and, although the 10th Duke had transferred his assets to his son during his lifetime in the hope of avoiding death duties, he died a few weeks too early for the lifetime exemption to apply, and tax was charged at 80% on the whole estate. The amount due was £7 million. Some of the family's advisers considered the situation to be irretrievable, and there was a proposal to transfer Chatsworth to the nation as a Victoria and Albert Museum of Northern England. Instead, the Duke decided to retain his family's home if he could. He sold tens of thousands of acres of land, transferred Hardwick Hall to the National Trust in lieu of tax, and sold some major works of art from Chatsworth. The family's Sussex house, Compton Place, was lent to a school. The effect of the death duties was mitigated to some extent by the historically low value of art during the post-war years and the increase in land values. Subsequent to 1950, during the post-war agricultural revival, and on the face of it, the losses were considerably less than 80% in terms of physical assets. In Derbyshire, 35,000 acres were retained out of 83,000 acres. The Bolton Abbey estate in Yorkshire and the Lismore Castle estate in Ireland remained in the family. Nonetheless, it took 17 years to complete negotiations with the Inland Revenue, interest being due in the meantime. The Chatsworth estate is now managed by the trustees of the Chatsworth Settlement, which was established in 1946. The 10th Duke was pessimistic about the future of houses like Chatsworth, and made no plans to move back in after the war. After Penrhos College left in 1945, the only people who slept in the house were 2 housemaids. But over the winter of 1948-49, the house was cleaned and tidied for reopening to the public by 2 Hungarian women who had been Kathleen Kennedy's cook and housemaid in London, and a team of the compatriots. In the mid-1950s, the 11th Duke and Duchess began to think about moving into the house. The pre-war house had relied entirely on a large staff for its comforts, and lacked modern facilities. The building was rewired, the plumbing and heating were overhauled, and 6 self-contained staff flats were created to replace the small staff bedrooms and communal servants' hall, including those in the staff flats. 17 bathrooms were added to the existing handful. The 6th Duke's Cavendish kitchen was abandoned and a new one was created closer to the family dining room. The family rooms were repainted, carpets were brought out of store, and curtains were repaired or replaced. The Duke and Duchess and the 3 children moved across the park from Enza House in 1959. In 1981, the trustees of the Chatsworth settlement, owners of the house, created a new charitable trust, the Chatsworth House Trust. The intention was to preserve the house and its setting for the benefit of the public. The new trust was granted a 99-year lease. This covered the house, its principal contents, grounds, precincts and adjacent forestry, a total of 1,822 acres. To legalize the arrangement, the Chatsworth House Trust pays a token rent of £1 a year. To facilitate this arrangement and provide the necessary multi-million-pound endowment fund, the trustees sold works of art, mostly old master drawings, which had not been on regular display. The family is represented on the Trust Council, but it is composed of a majority of non-family members. The Duke pays a market rent for the use of his private apartments in the house. The cost of running the house and grounds is around £4 million a year. 21st century. The 11th Duke died in 2004 and was succeeded by his son, the current Duke Peregrine Cavendish, 12th Duke of Devonshire. The 11th Duke's widow, the Dowager Duchess of Devonshire, died on the 24th of September 2014. Up until her death she was very active in promoting the estate and increasing its visitor income. She was responsible for many additions to the gardens, including the maze, the kitchen, the cottage gardens and several commissions of modern sculpture. She also wrote 7 books about different aspects of Chatsworth and its estate. Architecture. Chatsworth House is built on sloping ground, lower on the north and west sides than on the south and east sides. The original Tudor mansion was built in the 1560s by Bess of Hardwicke in a quadrangle layout, approximately 170 feet from north to south and 190 feet from east to west, with a large central courtyard. The front entrance was on the west front, which was embellished with 4 towers or turrets, and the Great Hall in the medieval tradition was on the east side of the courtyard, where the painted hall remains the focus of the house to this day. The south and east fronts were rebuilt under the order of William Tullman and were complete by 1696 for William Cavendish, 1st Duke of Devonshire. The 1st Duke's Chatsworth was a key building in the development of English Baroque architecture. According to the architectural historian Sir John Summerson, it inaugurates an artistic revolution which is the counterpart of the political revolution in which the Earl was so prominent a leader. The design of the south front was revolutionary for an English house, with no attics or hipped roof, but instead 2 main stories supported by a rusticated basement. The facade is dramatic and sculptural with Ionic pilasters and a heavy entablature and balustrade. The existing heavy and angular stone stairs from the first floor down to the garden are a 19th-century replacement of an elegant curved double staircase. The east front is the quietest of the 4 on the main block. Like the south front, it is unusual in that it has an even number of bays and no centerpiece. The emphasis is placed on the end bays, each highlighted by double pairs of pilasters, of which the inner pairs project outwards. The west and north fronts may have been the work of Thomas Archer, possibly in collaboration with the Duke himself. The west front has 9 wide bays with a central pediment supported by 4 columns and pilasters to the other bays. Due to the slope of the site, this front is taller than the south front. It is also large, with many other 9-bay 3-story facades a little more than half as wide and tall. The west front is very lively with much carved stonework, and the window frames are highlighted with gold leaf, which catches the setting sun. The north front was the last to be built. It presented a challenge, as the north end of the west front projected 9 feet further than the north end of the east front. This problem was overcome by building a slightly curved facade to distract the eye. The attic windows on this side are the only ones visible on the exterior of the house and are set into the main facade, rather than into a visible roof. Those in the curved section were originally oval, but are now rectangular like those in the end sections. The north front was altered in the 19th century when William Cavendish, 6th Duke of Devonshire, along with the architect Geoffrey Wyatville, built the north wing, doubling the size of the house. Most of this wing only has 2 stories, compared to the 3 of the main blocks. It is attached to the northeast corner of the house, and is around 400 feet long. At the end of the north wing is the north, or Belvedere Tower. The work was carried out in an Italianate style that blends smoothly with the elaborate finish of the Baroque house. The 6th Duke built a gatehouse at this end of the house with 3 gates. The central and largest gate led to the north entrance, then the main entrance to the house. This is now the entrance used by visitors. The north gate led to the service courtyard, and the matching south gate led to the original front or in the west front, which was relegated to secondary status in the Duke's time, but is now the family's private entrance once again. The facades to the central courtyard were also rebuilt by the first Duke. The courtyard was larger than it is now, as there were no corridors on the western side and the northern and southern sides only had enclosed galleries on the first floor with open galleries below. In the 19th century, new accommodation was built on these 3 sides on all 3 levels. The only surviving Baroque facade is that on the eastern side, where 5 bays of the original 7 remain, and are largely as built. There are carved trophies by Samuel Watson, a Derbyshire craftsman who did a lot of work at Chatsworth in stone, marble and wood.